From small, unlucky mishaps with shinies, to completely replacing good shinies with much worse ones, let's take a look at 16 shiny Pokemon that took the transition to 3D way worse than others. Although a Pokemon that usually ironically slips many people's minds, Elgyem Shiny was a sight that would abduct your attention with its statue-like aesthetic, being coated in an ancient-looking, dark greyish blue and nicely fitting deep purple eyes. Yet when we travel to the third dimension, Elgyem's main difference now is pink eyes while floating in the shade. Great, now the whole line has lacking shinies. After withering away for a long time in the chambers of the 3DS, Leavanny finally has arrived to the Nintendo Switch. After venturing through the DLC, it's only natural that a shiny hunt would be also due for the long missing bug. Though when the shiny would eventually pop up, it would take a bit more time to tell the difference. Imagine if only it still had a such drastically vibrant and one-of-a-kind leaf coating. Tauros stomped into the latest generation with a whole new look and 2 pals as a regional variant. But the shinies leave more than some notable changes to be desired. Though when getting the original old bull back, the shiny definitely pops out the best out of the bunch. But just like the unfortunate downfall on the competitive side, Tauros shiny has seen some better days, now only being something that could be passed off as a distant Kelpie relative. If we're asked to think of a Pokemon that perfectly turns a horrifying creature into the most huggable thing ever, a lot of people definitely would agree with Lanturn as the pick. Better yet, the shiny does more than enough to help with that sentiment. But recently, on the other hand, some might say that a shiny is going back to the design origins roots and taking a note from its book. Either it's one small detail that ruins the whole experience, or overall coloring going in the wrong direction. Pokemon like Swalot and Palkia get done dirty by the nature of how 3D models work. Although the blue on Swalot still is somewhat consistent, the lack of crispy noodles for keeping the uncooked noodles instead leaves a small yet sour taste in our mouths. But that could be considered as nitpicking for some. So let's look at some more examples. As for Palkia, taking on a shade that's similar to the stripe coloring is a relatively small yet very effective change. But as we know very well by now, the colors on the 3D models end up usually pretty pale, which for a case of initially not so big changes already, causes the overall look to be less noticeable, hence also less appealing. For another one that fits this point, Zebstrika's case is more of an unusual one, being that how sprites work. In the shiny, the bluish silver hints on the stripes and mane brings the whole design together very well. But going to 3D, the stripes and mane stay pretty much unnoticeable, while the electricity running through the body also ends up being obsolete with a yellow to greenish yellow not being visible at all. Speaking of pale colors though, how could we go without mentioning the unlucky demise of shinies that were worthy of their name just by being highly saturated, but ended up being ruined in the 3D era? As for one that perfectly fits this case, Drapion back in the day was rocking a nice amaranth coloring with plenty of saturation to make the difference very visible. But when stepping onto the 3DS, its colors were completely sucked out dry, which later on with the Isle of Armor did not help when lighting was involved, in result leaving a lot of people with strained eyesight only to try see the difference. Maybe it's to fit the ghostly typing, but Dusclops ends up with the same fate. Originally rocking a nicely saturated tone between red and orange, old age did not come without consequences. By the time we could see our one-eyed friend from multiple angles, Dusclops looks like he mastered his sucking ability too much and gobbled up his soul along with the rest by the time he popped up on the 3D scene. Even though it possibly doesn't even count, it's still quite an interesting thing to look at. As we all know, Arceus has a special form relating to all the types, which also means that those forms have shinies as well. Although they look fine as is currently, I did say every type, which also goes for the mysterious question mark type. That surprisingly had a special form with a shiny to go along with it. But as quickly as you learned about its existence, it vanished even before the final 2D game, hence never having a form nor a shiny for it in the 3D games. Little bit cheeky, but technically fits the video's title. Many already most likely consider Gengar to not have the best shiny in the sprite-based games, except GSC, but the way our discolored pal's fate ends up playing out still turns out worse than already before. Not only did with each generation since the first one with shinies did it get continuously worse, but it also now is considered to be one of the worst shinies ever, especially considering how amazing it looks in Mega or G-Max form. But hey, nothing worse than the shinies for the armor duo. Considering how many green and yellow shiny sprites end up turning into unfortunate shades of piss in the newer games, it's an unlucky outcome already, including the yellowish orange shiny for Sableye. Even though in the latest games it has had a small redemption relating to the sickly coloring, turns out Sableye has an even crueler story. If you didn't already know, the initial first appearance in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire gave the shiny a slightly different look, one that fits the earthly, mineral theme Sableye has going on much better. Too bad it got left behind right away. Our poor fella Eelektrik is already not many people's favorite and greatly suffers from middle child syndrome. But ironically, having every single bit of saturation sucked out of its shiny sprite, only to be spit out as a slightly altered version compared to the regular one, probably hurts a lot. If green shinies didn't already have it rough by being usually labeled as the worst coloring for shiny Pokemon, Bronzong unfortunately fits the argument as to why they are disliked so much very precisely. Even though the appealing emerald green looked amazing on 2D Bronzong, the way the colors ends up turning out on the other side in a mistreated manner is just a showcase of great potential being lost by losing a lot of brightness and saturation. Imagine how much better green shinies would be if they look like this. Still don't think that saturation is the main cause for many of these outcomes? Well, let me present you a dish of Crawdaunt as an example. Although the shiny in RC did have a problem that's very similar to the likes of shiny Garchomp and Gengar, luckily Crawdaunt, by the time of Black and White, ends up being nicely fixed back up. Though when it's time to jump into the third dimension, shiny Crawdaunt got a bit too weak against bugs and got a stomach bug that left the poor mon sick way up until today. Having a bad shiny become worse due to 3D is one thing, but what if I told you there has been a time when Game Freak actually fixed bad shinies? Well, in Sword and Shield, with the return of the Hoenn starters, the Fire Chick family got some attention with a fix, giving shiny Combusken a much greater look. That's cool and all, but just like me, you're probably most excited to see how shiny Blaziken looks. Oops, my bad, that's the wrong one. Let me just flip it... it's the actual one. They didn't fix it at all. Well, if having a bad shiny become a bit worse due to 3D wasn't bad enough, having the existence of the unfortunate shiny be acknowledged by the creators only to completely ignore you and change up the lesser version of it instead, most likely is quite a slap across the face.